We're really excited to have Dr. Anderson with us. He is no stranger to Costa Rica. He's been here many times, and I know he loves the country dearly. So, Neil J. Anderson is a professor and chair of the Department of English Language Teaching and Learning at Brigham Young University, Hawaii, and the director of the Center for English Language Learning. Professor Anderson is the author or co-editor of over 50 books, book chapters, and journal articles. His research interests include second language reading, language learner strategies, learner self-assessment, motivation in language teaching and learning, and ELT leadership development. Professor Anderson served as president of TESOL International Association from 2001 to 2002. He's been a Fulbright teaching and research scholar in Costa Rica and in Guatemala. Professor Anderson was the 2014 recipient of the prestigious TESOL International Association James Atlas Service Award. In 2016, on the 50th anniversary of TESOL International Association, Professor Anderson was recognized as one of the 50 individuals who has made a significant contribution to the profession of teaching English to speakers of other languages. So here to speak with us today with his PD talk entitled Enhancing Learner Motivation in the EFL Classroom, please welcome Dr. Anderson with a warm virtual applause. So let's show your hands, everybody. There we are.
Well, I am very excited to be back in Costa Rica, and in particular to have the opportunity today to engage with this community of practice. I'm looking forward to our discussion today as we look at ways that we can enhance the motivation of the students in our classrooms. And this is, I think, a particularly valuable topic for us to be thinking about right now, given that virtually all of our teaching is happening in a remote context. So let's look at ways that we can, as instructors, monitor and help the motivation levels of the students that we're working with. Today, as I share with you the ideas about motivation in the classroom, in particular, I'm going to be using an analogy of a roller coaster. So you've seen some of the roller coasters that appear in amusement parks where there are loops in the roller coaster. Just this week, I read that there is a roller coaster that is going to be going about 150 miles per minute. Now, I'm not sure that I want to be on that roller coaster because that's going way too fast for me. But you see that in roller coasters where there are loops, those loops present some feelings of exhilaration and excitement. And we're going to look at how those loops can be related to setting short-term goals and helping guide our students through a motivational framework that allows them to take responsibility for part of their learning and for us to facilitate that process. We're also going to get out into breakout rooms here on Zoom today multiple times during our session. And in each of the breakout sessions, I'm going to be timing them so that we'll have a limited amount of time. And in some cases, there might not be all of the time that perhaps you wish that you could have in the breakout session. One of the things that we know about motivation in the classroom is that you want to end discussions at an appropriate point. You don't want discussions to extend all the way to the end of the discussion. There's one author that says you want to catch the discussion or end the discussion on the crest of the wave. Now, as Mark indicated, I live in Hawaii in the United States, and I can just tell you that the Pacific Ocean is right there. I'm looking at it right now and I can see waves. They're not very big today here in Hawaii, but as a teacher, I like this concept and idea of ending a discussion at the crest of the wave, not before the wave crashes down on itself, but just as the wave is getting up at the perfect point for someone that is surfing. Now, I'm not a surfer, but that perfect wave is when it's forming that cone and the surfer can go right into the cone before it crashes down on itself. That's when we want to end the discussions, because it keeps things moving in our classrooms. So today, we're going to have time in multiple breakout sessions, but just know that the amount of time in that breakout session is going to be limited, and it's limited for pedagogical purposes, okay? Now, in our session today, there are 3 outcomes that I want us thinking about for our session today. First, as a result of this session, you will justify why motivation is an essential part of our planning for student learning success in the classroom. Second, we will explore a 4-part framework for fostering and sustaining motivation in our classrooms. And third, we will examine some practical ideas for applying the framework in our classrooms. So these are the 3 things that I hope that we can accomplish in this PD talk today in our next hour and 20 minutes together. As I have now shared with you those 3 outcomes, here's my challenge for you as we get started in this PD talk today. As a result of attending this PD talk today, make an explicit plan for how you will implement one small change in your teaching within the next week. And associated with that, I want you to determine how you will hold yourself accountable to accomplish your plan. Several of you have heard me present before, and you might have heard me indicate that in many professional development contexts, teachers are very excited about gathering. And particularly right now, during this worldwide pandemic, and we're isolated in our individual homes, we love engaging in PD opportunities because it gives us a chance to interact with other teachers. But one of the things that the literature on teacher professional development indicates is that many teachers never change what they do in their classrooms as a result of attending a PD activity. So that's why I've got this challenge for you today. I want you to be identifying one small change that you can make and begin experimenting with. And when we hold ourselves accountable in some way, then it increases the chances that we're actually going to follow through with our plan. Most of the ways that we can improve our teaching happen in small incremental ways, not in big changes that we make. It's the small incremental changes that result in the greatest impact in our classes. So during this session today, as you take notes for yourself, just start making a list of ideas that occur to you of things that you could consider. And then at the end of the PD talk today, I'll return to this challenge and have you specifically start identifying what is the one small change you want to make and how will you hold yourself accountable. Okay, before we dive into the concept of motivation and look at this framework for pedagogical practice that I want to share with you today, I want to first situate motivation, because motivation is just one part of a kaleidoscope of things that teachers need to be thinking about in order to enhance engagement in the classroom. So I've listed here 8 things that can impact student learning in our classes. There's motivation. There's the student's ability to engage in metacognition. There's self-regulation. There's our students' perceptions of themselves and their self-concept. There's the learner's belief about herself. There are mindsets that our students have of whether this task is too difficult or whether they believe that they can accomplish their goals as a language learner. There's group dynamics. We know there's great literature in English language teaching on group dynamics and how the groups can impact each other, members of the group. And then there's also our emotional state. We know that when learners are in a positive emotional state, that emotional state is going to have an impact not just on them as an individual learner, but also they're going to be able to spread the emotional contagion with other members of the class or the groups that they're working with. So you see that motivation is just one of many affective issues that we should be considering in our teaching. And all of these issues tie directly to the concept of engagement. So the darkest part of this kaleidoscope view that you see on the screen now, right there where the G and the E intersect with all of the colors, that darkest part of the model is where motivation, metacognition, self-regulation, self-concept, learner beliefs, mindset, group dynamics, and emotion all come together. And it's not just these 8 ideas that impact engagement in the classroom. There are many, many other factors that are going to have a direct impact on student engagement in our classes. So as we talk today about motivation, I want you to just be aware and keep upmost in your thinking that motivation is just one aspect of engagement, and that there are many other things that we can and should be thinking about in terms of enhancing learner engagement in our classes and in their learning. Now, we're going to get into our first breakout session. And in these sessions, in the breakout rooms, Mark's going to be setting them up so that there are about 5 people per room. And in this first breakout session, I want you to consider this question: how would you define motivation? And as you define motivation in your group, see if you can identify just a couple of key words that define motivation. So we're going to take 4 minutes to go in this first breakout room. And what I would like to do is suggest that the individual who has the shortest hair be the individual in the group breakout session to begin the discussion. So when you get into your group of 5, everybody look at each other on the screen, and the individual who has the shortest hair is going to get the discussion going. How would you define motivation? Let's take 4 minutes in this breakout session and look at this idea. So, as I was just indicating, I got put into a room, and I actually stayed initially because there was only one other live participant in that room. So if I had left, Sylvia would have been by herself. Sylvia and I had a great discussion, and then Sandra joined our room. And I've actually asked Sylvia and Sandra to be prepared to share with everybody the things that we talked about in terms of how we define motivation. So Sylvia, would you be willing to share with the group what you contributed to our discussion in our breakout room?
They're saying, I think it was Laura instead. Is that possible? Yes.
Yeah. Is there a Laura?
Okay. Yes, there is. Let's see.
I apologize, Laura. That
Go,
is
go ahead,
embarrassing.
Laura.
Okay, hello. Good afternoon, everybody. It was me, yes, Laura. Don't worry, Dr. Neil. It was a pleasure to share with you these 4 minutes and with Sandra, I think it was. Well, we were talking about, I couldn't think about another word when you mentioned about motivation, defining motivation was engagement, to keep our students engaged. But Dr. Neil made me see that our students could be motivated even if they are not engaged. Is that right, Dr. Neil? Yeah.
So you, in our discussion with Laura, uh, one of the things that we highlighted is that you can have motivated students, but their motivation may not lead to total engagement. For example, Laura pointed out that if you're reading something that you like, you're likely to be motivated and engaged. But if you're reading something that you do not like, the topic isn't of interest to you, you might be still motivated to learn, but you're not engaged with that topic because it's a topic that you're not particularly interested in. Now, Laura, who was the other woman in our group, Sylvia or Sandra?
Sandra.
Sandra. So
Yes.
Mark, can you unmute Sandra from group 14? And Sandra also added a really good element in the definition of motivation.
I
Go
am
ahead, Sandra.
here. Thank you, Dr. Neil. Well, basically, I said very little because I had very little time to share with them. But what I shared with them was that I believe motivation to be something that actually makes you want to move. Whether the direction might be an objective or a desire, but it's like this thing inside you, wanting to make you move. That's it.
Excellent. So here, the key element in a definition of the concept of motivation is something that moves you.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look
it
at
be-
one definition of motivation provided by Zoltan Dörnyei. Dörnyei is perhaps the leading specialist in our field of English language teaching on the topic of motivation. And if any of you are interested, you can just do a Google search of Zoltan Dörnyei and you can get to his personal website. And on his personal website, he has made available for free copies of almost every article that he has written in his career as an English language educator. So many of the articles that he has written, he's got a PDF version of that article up on his personal website. So if some of you want to do some exploring of this topic on your own a little later, just Google Zoltan Dörnyei. In one of his publications in 2009, here are some key things that he said that I think are important for us to keep in mind. Perhaps the only thing about motivation most researchers would agree on is that it, by definition, concerns the direction and magnitude of human behavior. That is, the choice of a particular action, the persistence with it, the effort expended on it. In other words, motivation is responsible for why people decide to do something, how long they are willing to sustain the activity, and how hard they are going to pursue it. I think this definition of motivation helps us to begin to think about ideas like engagement and like the direction or the movement that you're going. And if you can be thinking about these three key phrases, why, how long, and how hard, those are three critical elements of a definition of motivation. Because if we know why someone is studying English, if we know how long they're willing to sustain their study and how hard they're willing to work, that's going to begin to give us a sense of their motivation. One of the things that I do when I'm working with both teachers that I'm training and English language learners that I'm working with, at the beginning of the semester or the course, I will ask them, why are you studying English? And then in particular, depending on their level of language proficiency, if they're at lower levels of proficiency, I will ask them, how long are you willing to stay fully engaged and committed to learning English in order to reach your goal? Some learners have unrealistic expectations for how long it's going to take them to develop the English language skills they will need in order to accomplish their long-term goal. And then I also want to ask them, how hard are you willing to work in order to proceed or to pursue your goal of using English as a tool to accomplish other long-term goals that you have in your life? So the key words and phrases of why, how long, and how hard are three key elements that we can work with students on in helping them to look at this concept of motivation. Now, why is this topic of enhancing learner motivation important for us to consider? In the kaleidoscopic view that I gave you earlier of engagement, we know that motivation is just one part of engagement, that there are many other factors that are going to impact student engagement. We want to make sure that we are capitalizing on our opportunity to enhance student performance so that they can achieve their long-term goals. And our role as English language educators, if we understand the impact that motivation has on engagement in our classrooms, we're going to be able to facilitate that forward movement that the students are going to be engaged in. Here's another quote from Dörnyei. Unfortunately, motivational issues do not tend to receive sufficient emphasis in L2 teacher education. And as a consequence, instructors often find themselves in situations where they are expected to meet challenging demands of classroom management without sufficient awareness and training. I don't know about your preparation as a language teacher, but my guess is that you did not take a course that looked at the topic of motivation. Motivation might have been embedded as a smaller unit within a course, but rarely is there a course on learner motivation and teacher motivation in teacher preparation programs in our field. Interestingly, because of this quote, this very quote that you see from Dörnyei, I have proposed to teach a course in our TESOL program here at BYU Hawaii in our spring semester. And in that course, we're going to take the entire course to look at two concepts, motivation and engagement. And we're going to spend the entire semester. And the reason that I proposed this course is as a result of this quote from Dörnyei from his 2018 publication. I think that this topic merits enough importance that we need to be making some shifts in our teacher education programs in order to dedicate larger chunks of time to the concept of both teacher motivation and learner motivation. Now, a key question for us to be thinking about is whose responsibility is it to motivate students? Now, when I ask this question of learners, what do you think their typical answer is? I just did a survey with one of the classes that I'm teaching to English language learners this semester on our campus in a remote environment. And I said, whose responsibility is it to motivate you? Many of the students think that it's my responsibility. And what I'm trying to help the students experience is a shift in their thinking so that they see that I am a co-facilitator of their motivation. That really we want to be looking at our individual responsibility to motivate ourselves. We want to look at our responsibility for motivation within the group that we are currently a member of. And we also want to look at the role that the teacher can play in that process. So I see three key individuals / groups of individuals who are responsible for motivating students. It's an individual's responsibility, it's a group responsibility, and it's a responsibility of the teacher. And as we proceed in our discussion from this point forward, you'll see how we'll be able to use the self, the group, and the teacher in this process of helping to establish motivational norms within the classroom. Now, a third quote here from Dörnyei, and this is also from his 2018 publication. Dörnyei notes the key question, therefore, is, can motivational skills be consciously developed in teachers? So keep in mind that I've just said the students have responsibility for themselves, for their group, and the teacher has a responsibility for motivation. So here Dörnyei is saying, can motivational skills be consciously developed by teachers? Can we consciously develop a way that we are going to play a role in the motivation within the classes and with individuals? Dörnyei continues, extensive past research suggests that while having a natural flair for teaching and communication is a definite advantage, motivational skills can be developed as part of a purposeful training program. And once such skills are in place, they will have a significant impact on student motivation. So one of the aspects that I want you to be thinking about today is, how motivated are you to be teaching in a remote teaching environment right now? How motivated are you to increase your capacity to be a better teacher of English in an online context? How motivated are you to increase your capacity to learn more about your role and responsibility as a motivator? Now, it speaks highly of you that you are part of this PD talk today, because that indicates that you've got a desire, that you want to be part of a community of practice that engages you in ideas about the topic of motivation. So congratulations, you've passed the first hurdle. We're going to look at other hurdles that you face in your process of learning to be a motivational influence in your classrooms with the direction that we're heading now. A key concept that I make with teachers that I work with and train is that if we want motivated learners, we must have motivated teachers. Students can sense our levels of motivation, and students can sense our degree of commitment very, very early in the learning process. So we want to make sure that we're motivated so that we in turn can then motivate our students. Here's the motivational teaching practice framework developed 20 years ago by Zoltan Dörnyei. Now, I can tell you that this framework, even though it's 20 years old, this framework has had a significant impact on my development as a teacher educator and as a teacher. I can tell you that prior to getting into Dörnyei's literature on motivation, I used to be one of the teachers that believed that it was the students' responsibility to motivate themselves. And I did not see any role that I could play in motivating students. I would tell teachers I trained and my colleagues, if a student doesn't want to learn, there's nothing I can do to change their perception. Students have to first change their perspective or their situation. And after the student takes the lead, then maybe I can help them. Well, this framework has changed completely my philosophy of my role as a facilitator of developing motivation. There are 4 key elements here in this framework for motivational teaching practice. First, we should be engaged in creating the basic motivational conditions. Second, as teachers, we want to be engaged in generating initial motivation. Third, as teachers, we want to make sure that we're engaged in maintaining and protecting motivation. And fourth, as teachers, we want to make sure we are engaged in encouraging positive retrospective self-evaluation, both of ourselves and providing those positive retrospective self-evaluation opportunities for our students. We're now going to look at each of these 4 elements of this framework, and I'm going to share with you one idea of something that teachers could do for that element of the framework. And then we'll have opportunities to get into the breakout rooms again for some brief periods of time to think, to see if there are other ideas that you have about each of these 4 elements of this framework of motivational teaching practice. So let's look first at creating the basic motivational conditions. One of the things that has helped me as both a teacher educator and a teacher in the language classroom is to initiate in-class conversations about motivation from the first day of class. I will typically begin that first day of class by explaining to the students why I am motivated to begin the course. I want the students to sense my motivation for our group and the topic that and the language skill that we will be focusing on for the course that we are currently in. And I tell them why I'm motivated, and then I help to explain to them that motivation is going to play a key role in our studies during that course so that we can all be continually motivating or monitoring our own motivation and the motivation of our peers. Here's one way that I do that in addition to my explaining my motivation for the student or for the subject in the class that we're in. I have a short video clip that I have broken into 4 segments that I show the students very early in each of the courses that I teach. I've just shown this video in 2 of the courses that I'm currently teaching. And the way that I do it, I try to break it into 4 chunks so that it's not a big task that takes a lot of classroom time. by having this video into 4 smaller clips, we can talk about each clip by itself over 4 different days and 4 different class sessions. Here's the first clip in this video.
Your learning experience can be compared to being on a roller coaster ride with multiple loops. Each loop increases in height as it progresses toward your ultimate goal. This roller coaster ride is very different from other roller coasters you have ridden. You have control over how high you go and how fast you arrive there. In order to arrive at your desired long-term goals and become your future L2 self, we must first have short-term goals. Let's begin with what gets this ride started and moving to your desired educational destination. You begin by deciding to participate in an educational experience. Now you've decided to study English in the EIL program. The power that drives the cart throughout the entire ride is your own motivation. Whose responsibility is it to get the cart started and moving forward? Who has control over the amount of energy that moves the cart? It is you. You have begun your quest for your long-term goal. You have demonstrated initial motivation. How much motivation do you have right now? Will you be motivated enough to make it up and around the first loop and accomplish your first short-term goal?
So you see that I'm using that analogy that I referred to earlier of the multiple loops in a roller coaster ride. Notice with this first loop that the color green goes through the entire cycle of this first loop on the roller coaster ride. There we go. Thank you. Okay, we're going to get into breakout rooms, and these breakout rooms it's going to be short. We're only going to be in here for 3 minutes. With this 3 minutes, what are some elements of this first little video clip that caught your attention in terms of responsibility for learning and goal setting? Let's go into these short breakout rooms.
Sounds good.
Very good. I had an opportunity to listen in on group number 1. And I'm going to ask Noelia from that group to share the insights that she shared with the other teachers in breakout room number 1. So Mark, if you can unmute Noelia's microphone so
Yes.
that she can share with us.
Mhm.
And
Go
I've
ahead,
asked
Noelia.
Noelia to tell us where she's teaching so that we have a little idea of her context.
Well, hi everybody. My name is Noelia. I work in Colegio de Señoritas in San Jose downtown here in Costa Rica. I was describing a little bit how hard it is to solve the idea that it's so good to the girls to learn how to speak in English because they just want to move to the other course. Well, in my case, I have like 120 minutes with my groups. I teach 7th graders, 8th graders, and 9th graders. Of course, with 10th and 11th graders, I have more time. But yeah, it is kind of hard that they understand that it's going to be good for their future to learn English because they just, well, when they are teenagers, they have different interests and different purposes for their lives. So they don't think that English is good enough sometimes. So in the process, of course, you have to learn how to sell the idea, and they have that they improve and that they have a real commitment to the second language. Yeah, and also, of course, I really like the idea at the beginning of the course that you tell them, explain to them that they must be responsible of their own learning, yeah? Like through metacognition, yeah, that they really realize that, of course, they need to work hard at home, yeah? It is not just the time that they're gonna be with the teacher, also time at home that they need to use to learn more about English. I really like your video, and I think that, of course, it is gonna work.
Thank you, Noelia. So notice
welcome.
that there are two key elements that Noelia highlighted there. One related to the students' goals for learning English. And we want to make sure that we're connecting with the students' goals and helping them to see what we're doing in class today is going to facilitate their development in achieving their longer term goals. And as Noelia highlighted, we also want to make sure that we're helping students see that it is their part of their responsibility to monitor their own levels of motivation.
Yeah.
Let's now move to the second segment in this 4-segment video that I show students. So with this first segment, I'll help students understand that they need to be setting multiple short-term goals and that their learning experience is going to take them to their ultimate goal. And we also highlight responsibility. If I can first get the students to understand their role in motivation, then later we can talk about how the group and I as the teacher can facilitate that process as well. So let's now look at the next segment. And here, the key question that we ended the last segment with is, how much motivation do you have? Look now at this second element in this roller coaster ride.
Let's now discuss the second part of your ride. It will be the hardest but most rewarding part if done well. Going up the loop requires effort. Your motivation must be strong enough to push you up the loop. You must increase the amount of effort you put into your learning. You know that as you put more effort into your learning, you will be able to reach your short-term goal.
So it's important that students understand that in addition to their own motivation, they need to put in effort. That you can be motivated, but without effort, the motivation isn't going to get you to accomplish your short-term and most importantly, your long-term goals. So I want to make sure that within the context of my classroom, I'm having this explicit conversation with the students about effort. And I make sure that the students know that I am going to carefully tailor the difficulty of the material to meet their individual growth needs. So I want them to know that the tasks in learning English are not all going to be easy. There will be some difficult elements and that I'm going to be pushing them, but I'm not going to be giving them tasks that are so difficult that it's going to ultimately result in an over-exertion of effort on their part. We want to make sure that students see that some degree of effort is essential on their part. The third segment of this video, as I introduce the third segment of the video on the third day, I will first preface it by saying, what is the first element in our cycle of motivation? And what color is that cycle? And I want the students to be associating motivation and green. Partly because green in the traffic light signal means go. It signals movement. It means going forward. So green, I want them connecting the color with the word motivation. I want them also, before we look at the third segment, to remember that motivation is important. And for visual learners, if they can connect blue with motivation, sometimes just remembering the blue is going to help them remember the word effort. Once we reestablish that motivation is their responsibility and part of their long-term vision and their short-term goals, and that effort is required, Then we look at this third segment.
At this point in the roller coaster ride, you have exerted enough effort to reach the top of this loop. This point on the ride can be the most thrilling and satisfying part. You can experience the high and exhilaration of having achieved something by your own motivation and efforts. You must recognize the results of your efforts and motivation in a positive way.
So notice here that the third element in this motivational cycle with the students is results. And with this cycle, or this part of the cycle, I help the students see that with every task that we do in our class, they should be looking at the results of their performance on that task in positive ways. I tell them that I'm going to create the ideal learning environment for all of us to make mistakes and not be ashamed or embarrassed because of the mistakes. With both oral language and written language, I encourage the students to make as many mistakes as possible because the mistakes are going to allow us to look at our results in improving our English language skills. And if we can begin rewarding students for their mistakes in oral and written language, and then using those mistakes as a way to look at the results, it's going to help the students see results, not in a punitive way of scoring low on an examination or a classroom activity, but seeing that as a stepping stone for making mistakes, or yes, making mistakes and then correcting those mistakes and making the connection for how or what caused them to make the mistake. So anything that we can do to allow the students to use the results of their performance in our classes in positive ways is ultimately going to impact the motivational atmosphere in our classes. Let's now segment or make our segue to the fourth and final segment of this video clip. We've got motivation in green, effort in blue, results in yellow. Let's now look at what the fourth segment is. And before I show this short video clip, on the fourth day, we'll have a brief discussion again about green, blue, and yellow, and those colors and the keywords and why those things are important. And then we get to this fourth and final element.
Next, on the way down the other side of the loop, you use your awareness of your efforts to recalibrate and to prepare yourself to reach your next short-term goal. Reaching your next short-term goal will require you to repeat the roller coaster cycle of more motivation, more effort, and increased vision to continue progressing and enjoying this educational roller coaster until you reach your long-term goals and become your desired future L2 self. Your future self is depending on your present self to create it.
So notice with that last line in the video clip, your present self is counting on your future self is counting on your present self to create it. So part of what I want to do in my classes as we look at this roller coaster ride is to make sure that students are continually looking long-term, not just this course, but where do they see themselves in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years from now? And what role do they see English playing in their future? And particularly with teenagers and adult learners, I want them to be envisioning as clearly as they can where they see themselves in the future and what role English is going to play in that process. Because then we can continually look at each loop, looking at individual assignments that we have in the course and looking at this sequence of motivation, effort, results, and recalibrate. Now, with the recalibration, I want the students to be thinking, okay, how can I take the current level of motivation that I have with my past effort, with the results I just achieved on this classroom task? What do I now need to do as I'm moving forward in the process of developing and enhancing my English language skills? So this cycle, because I introduce it early in the course, then provides an opportunity for me to continue the discussion. There will be class sessions where I will pause and I'll say, let's take an effort assessment right now. How much effort are you putting into what we're doing right now in your groups? Excuse me. And I want to keep daily reminding students of these 4 elements in some way: motivation, effort, results, and recalibrate. Okay. Let's get back into the breakout sessions. And what ideas do you have for this first component for creating the basic motivational conditions in your teaching context? What are some things that you could do to create those basic motivational conditions? Let's take 3 minutes in this breakout, and you'll be with the same participants you've been with in the other rooms, okay? Let's go ahead and go to those rooms.
All right, sounds great.
Okay, I popped into breakout rooms 2 and 3, and I heard some great comments coming. Blanca highlighted the importance of students understanding the power for learning, particularly with secondary school students who often do not want to be in English class, but they have to. It's a requirement. So there's an element of motivation that's called required motivation, because you're not willingly doing this because of your own desire. You're doing it because there's something in the system that requires that you be in this environment. But Blanca highlighted how important it is that we help students see the power for learning. And then in breakout 3, Diego and Rolando and Hernando, and there were others in that group, but in that group, they were talking about expectations. And I think that that's a really valuable way that we can help students in that initial discussion about motivation to understand what the expectations are for success in the course that you are currently teaching. So that video clip is one of the ways that I engage in the initial discussions of motivation. Let's now look at generating initial motivation. Here, you want to be thinking in terms of this component of the motivational teaching practice framework. You want to be thinking about ways that you can generate initial motivation for the unit or the day or the task that learners are engaged in. So at the beginning of a new unit or the beginning of a class session, help the students see the purpose of the day's instruction. So the reason that this is important is that if students see the reason for today's class, and if you can connect the reason for today's class with long-term goals, that's going to help the students understand why they need to develop mastery over the concepts that you're teaching that particular day in class. One of the ways that you can do that is by writing clearly stated learning outcomes. And in a physical classroom, you want to write those learning outcomes on your whiteboard in the classroom so that they are visible during the entire instructional period. If you're teaching remotely, make sure that you have those learning outcomes visible for the students at the beginning of class and at least one time during class and again at the end of class, because we can generate initial motivation for today's class if we're continually reminding them, why are we doing this? Why are we learning to write a good paragraph? Why are we learning to use this grammar point in our speaking? Why are we learning about causes and effects? Why are we learning about problems and solutions? How is that going to help you long term? So if you can use very clearly stated, very strong verbs in your learning outcome statement, that's going to help you. And you might consider Bloom's taxonomy as a resource for identifying the verbs that you want to use. So if you're thinking of the cognitive processes of remembering, understanding, applying, evaluate, apply, analyze, evaluate, create. So if you can keep those 6 cognitive processes in mind, that can often help you, because as you're trying to establish the outcome, you can ask yourself, am I trying to ask the students to do something that requires them to remember and understand, which are foundational cognitive processes? Or in this class, are you trying to get the students to do something where they have to apply, analyze, evaluate, or create with the language? By establishing those clearly articulated learning outcomes, we're generating initial motivation for the unit or the class that we are currently teaching. The third element in Dörnyei's framework for motivational teaching practice is maintaining and protecting motivation. This is particularly important for us as English language teachers because motivation fluctuates. Just because I say that I'm motivated to study a language does not mean that that motivation is always going to be high. Our motivation will fluctuate and we're going to vacillate between high motivation, low motivation. As language teachers, we want to be watching for the fluctuations in motivation during the class session, and we need to be prepared to maintain and protect the levels of motivation. So often when I'm teaching, if I start to see that motivation is going down, I will interrupt right in the middle of an activity and I will try to reconnect the students to our purpose. And I might ask them, why are we doing this? And if I can reconnect the students to the why, that will often help bring the motivation levels back up. I've also found that in helping to maintain and protect motivation, that if I help to establish motivational partnerships in the classroom, then we're allowing our classroom community to be a source of motivation. So remember that earlier on in our discussion, we indicated that individuals have responsibility for motivation. The group has responsibility for the motivation of everyone in the group, and the teacher has responsibility for motivation. There is value in helping students to establish motivational partnerships. And one of the motivational partnerships that I help students see that they should be building and maintaining is a partnership between themselves and their peers. And in this way, I help the students to see how the partnership between them and other members of the class is going to help us be motivated. I also help the students see that there's the partnership between themselves as the learner and themselves as being responsible for their learning. There's a motivational partnership between them and me as a teacher. And then I want to help students see that there might be others that they can look to for motivational purposes. For example, parents can play a role as a motivational partner in the language learning process. Role models can also play a process in the motivational learning process. So if you know a role model of someone that's doing the task that you as a learner want to ultimately be doing, you should look at how that individual obtained or studied English in order to get to the level of language proficiency that they could use English successfully to perform the tasks that they want to do as a user of English. So part of the way for maintaining and protecting the fluctuations that can happen in language learning is to help students form these motivational partnerships. And we've got those partnerships with themselves as a learner, with their peers. And remember, we want to make sure that peers see a key responsibility of helping to maintain motivation in the class. The teacher plays a role in that process as a motivational partner, and the learners can turn to others outside of the learning context, role models and parents, to help them in that process. And in that way, they are maintaining and protecting their motivation. The fourth element of this framework that has helped transform the way I approach the component of motivation in my classes is to make sure that I'm providing engagement for encouraging positive retrospective self-evaluation. And in this aspect, I want to provide reflection tasks that require the students to evaluate their own progress on accomplishing the learning outcomes. One of the ways that I do that is with an exercise where we talk about critical but healthy self-assessment, and we contrast critical and healthy self-assessment with superficial self-assessment and with hypercritical self-assessment. We don't want the students to be so hypercritical of their performance and progress in English. We also don't want them to be superficial about their progress and development in their English language skills. We want to make sure that they are engaged in critical but healthy self-assessment. One of the specific classroom tasks that I will often engage students in is a task that's called the 3-2-1 summary. And I will take the last 5 minutes of class and I'll ask the students to identify responses to these 3 prompts. The first prompt says, list 3 things that you learned today from your peers that you probably would not have learned on your own. Part of the reason that I ask this question is that I want them thinking of their peers as a resource, not just for motivation, but also as a source for learning. So we can engage the students in positive retrospective self-evaluation by thinking, what are 3 things that I learned from my classmates today? The second prompt says, list 2 things that you learned from me. And the me in this question is the teacher. So I also want to get a sense, as the students are exiting today's class, what did they learn from their peers? What did they learn from me? Then the third prompt in this 3-2-1 summary is, what is 1 question that you would like answered before we move forward with our learning? This provides the learners with an opportunity to reflect on their own issues of related to the tasks that we're currently doing in the language classroom, and to ask a question. I will then take the responses from this 3-2-1 summary And I will share some of the results of the 3-2-1 summary in the next class session. In particular, I want to be looking at their questions. What are the questions that they want answered before we move forward? And what I have found is that there will often be an overlap. If one student asks a question, it is likely that other students will ask a similar type of question. So I'm able then to use their questions as the springboard to introduce the next class period. And by using this 3-2-1 summary, it ties into the motivational atmosphere of the classroom because the students see that I'm using their responses to this summary at the end of class as we make our transition to the next class session. Notice here the title is 3-2-1 summary, and first prompt you want 3 answers from the students. In the second prompt you want 2 answers. In the third prompt you want 1 answer. So that's why it's called a 3-2-1 summary. And you can vary these prompts. You don't have to use the prompts that you see on the screen now. Just think of a prompt. What's something that I could ask the students that I can get 3 answers from them? What's one question I can ask that I can get 2 answers? What's one question I can ask to get 1 answer? And you're using this 3-2-1 summary as a way to encourage positive, retrospective self-evaluation. Dörnyei's framework here, creating the basic motivational conditions, generating initial motivation, maintaining and protecting motivation, and encouraging positive retrospective self-evaluation is a framework that you can use to help guide you in your thinking about how to improve English language instruction with the learners you're currently working with, and helping to build your skills to motivate the students and help them build their skills to motivate themselves. We'll come back to questions in just a minute if we've got some time, but I just want to remind you, here's where I want to remind you of the action that you're going to take. So what is one thing that you're going to do within the next week to take action on what we have discussed today? Don't try and choose lots of things. Just choose one idea from today, one small idea. And then consider how will you hold yourself accountable for completing the task. Let me give you one suggestion. You could log into the Community of Practice website for PD Talks from the Centro Cultural site, and you can proclaim right there on the site today, here's what I'm going to do to take action for facilitating and enhancing motivation in my teaching. Put it out there on the Community of Practice. And then a week from today, go back into the Community of Practice and report your progress for this week. I find that if we make our intentions public, and that helps to hold us accountable for our intentions. So one simple way that you could do that is just get onto the Community of Practice website today. Declare your intention of what you're going to do, and then a week from today, get on and follow up. Our real aim as educators must be to foster learners' motivation from within. Ultimately, for those secondary school students who don't want to be in our English class, we want to be fostering motivation from within them. And if we can be following the framework that we've discussed today, we might make some dramatic changes with those secondary school students who right now don't see a need to be in English class. So if you can be looking for ways to foster that motivation from within, you'll be helping the students in your classes. Here's one page of references with some key articles that you might want to look up to extend your thinking about motivation. And Mark has indicated that the recording of this session will be on the Centro Cultural's site. You could also quickly just pull out your camera and take a picture of this screen. And then this gives you 5 resources that you can go to. I hope that our session today has caused you to look at enhancing learner motivation in the classroom from a new lens. I hope that you see ways that you can facilitate learner development and learner motivation by taking responsibility for what you do to create the right atmosphere and to help the students learn how to take responsibility, how you can create a classroom atmosphere where we're all helping and taking care of each other in the learning process in order that motivation levels will have a lower fluctuation of motivation rather than dramatic fluctuations of motivation. It is 12:30 my time, 4:30 for you in Central America, where many of you are from. This is the end of the talk, but I'm willing to stay on for a few more minutes if there are any lingering questions that anyone has. But I'm basically going to turn it back to Mark and let him decide what to do at this point.
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Anderson. Let's give him another virtual applause, those that have your cameras on. And well, we've budgeted 2 hours, so I mean, it's really up to you. I know that there's some questions and some comments coming in through the chat, so we'd be happy to feed them to you. We do want to make one comment here quickly. If anyone has to leave early, we have been posting links in the chat for our survey. We do ask you to please complete that. That gives us really great feedback about what we're doing here, but also gives you the chance to write your name the way that you would like it to be spelled in your digital certificate, which you should be getting next week or the week afterwards. I'm also going to be spamming the chat with the link to sign up for our community of practice. Or if you're already a member and you can't remember what was that link again, we have the link for you to go to it as well. Okay, so yes, we are open for questions and comments. So I'll be scrolling here through the chat, Dr. Anderson.
So I'm scrolling through the chat as well. Mark, if you find a question, I haven't found any yet, but if you find a question, go ahead and ask it, and I will.
We also have some people raising their hands, so perhaps they might want to ask their question directly. So I see, Sandra, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. I just want to thank you and tell you that I've been studying with different people, with different books, the topic of motivation. But today, it's the first time that I feel that I can actually go back to my classroom and do something practical on it. And I'm definitely going to follow your advice and do something on my next class. And what I'm gonna do is this suggestion you gave us for actually taking them every class at the beginning of the class and during the class and at the end of the class to show them where are they going and how are they making it. I'm going to. Thank you.
Excellent, Sandra. So in the community of practice, a week from today, do a report of how that turned out for you. And a week from today, I'm going to get into the community of practice site and look specifically for what you've posted so that I can see how that went. I see that Sarah has her hand raised.
Yes, let me just give her access. Go ahead, Sarah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Actually, I'm kind of proud of myself because this week, in addition to my daily agenda in my class, I list at the very top under the date with a star next to it the learning outcomes or objective of that class. And, you're always taught that you need to keep that in mind. Teachers are often expected to write their objectives, but usually that's for the admin part. And the students don't get to see that often. So I feel motivated and I feel excited that, okay, I'm challenging myself to stay also on task. I think my question for you and for the audience, those who work with high schoolers or middle schoolers and teenagers, asking them the question and bringing it back, if they're lacking that motivation, or they're saying, well, why do we have to do this? And instead of saying, well, because you have to, no, that's not good enough. Why are we learning this? My question is, what if I can't convince them? What if I can't answer that question well enough to convince them that, yeah, I see, the power in that? How do you convince teenagers that they're doing this for their own good?
That's a great question, Sarah. And there's two things that I want to highlight here as I respond. The first, there's a concept that's called emotional contagion. So that means that emotions are contagious in our classes. If there's one student that is exerting a lot of negative emotions in class, that negative emotion is going to spread like wildfire in the classroom. And there's one student that could say, I don't like this. I don't understand why we're doing this. Why is this important? I don't want to be here. We're just here because it's a requirement. Everybody else is going to jump on that student's bandwagon and say, yes, 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 I agree. Why are we here? What you want to try and do is make sure that positive emotional contagion is spreading more than negative. One of the ways that I have found particularly helpful is if I can find someone who was in the grade that I'm currently teaching or the class I'm currently teaching. If I can find someone who was in my class a year, a semester, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ago, to come and talk to my current groups of students, that often helps them to get over this why are we doing it phase. There was one time that I was teaching a beginning group of students in a reading class, and it was getting particularly challenging. And when I finished teaching that day and returned to my office, a former student from our program was at my office to chat with me. And he had started in the very lowest level in our language program. He had gone through every level in our program. He had then finished our program and entered the university and did a master's degree program, a PhD. He went home to South Korea and was using English daily in his work. Well, I asked him if he would come to my class the next day. And he came and he said, oh, I'm really happy to be in this room because I sat in this room, in these desks, many years ago. I was in this program. Let me tell you how being in this class helped me accomplish my long-term goal. That made a huge difference in the positive atmosphere in my class. So Sarah, that's just one idea that you can consider. Find a student in your middle school or high school that maybe is now in grade 12 and you see them doing positive things with English. See if you can get them to come back to your class. I see that Lynn has her hand raised.
Go ahead, Lynn. You have to unmute yourself.
There we go. Hello, Dr. Anderson. It's nice to see you again. I have it goes on Sarah's question. And, sometimes when I've taught teens or what we call teens. I think eighth grade, 7th and 8th grade, it's like, how can you, there's like a wall. How do you get them to be motivated at the moment is my question. I mean, there are days they just drag themselves in and you go, hello, how's everybody today? And they're like, and they sound like a bunch of vacas, a lot of cows. And then you're trying to do a game or songs or talk to your partner or, I have all these activities to try to do a warm up, get them motivated, get them energized. And it's just, they don't even want to get up. They don't even want to stand up. They don't even want to talk to anybody. I mean, what do you do just to get the momentary motivation going?
So Lynn, that is a reality, not just in your class, but in everybody's class. There are going to be those days. If you have initiated the conversation about motivation from the first day, and in my case, I've shown that video and we've talked about motivation, effort, results, and recalibration. If students come into the class under the conditions that you've just described, I will sit down in a chair, and rather than starting my lesson plan with the game or the activity or the song, I'll sit down in my chair and I'll fake being unmotivated. And for a few minutes, I'll just say, oh, you know what? You are absolutely right. Today is just a terrible day. I don't want to be here either. Should we all just go home? And of course, when you say, should we all just go home? They're all going to say, yes, let's all go home. I'll then pause and say, okay, what are the consequences of our actions of going home? What will happen to us if we go home? And then I'll say, for me as your teacher, if I go home right now, what's going to happen to me? Am I happy with the consequences if I go home? And I'll pause long enough for them to begin saying, oh, yeah, no. If Mr. Anderson goes home today, he could lose his job. So I'll then say, okay, what do we need to do to recalibrate today? I sense that there's lots of not necessarily negative vibes today, but overwhelmed vibes, discouraged vibes. What's going on? What's causing this? And take 10, 15 minutes to talk about, why are you tired? Why are you feeling this way? And often just taking the time to listen to them, you can say, okay, I understand exactly where you're coming from and I understand the challenges, but really what benefit would it do for us to go home today? Nothing. So let's see if we can have a shift in our attitude, because if we shift our own attitudes, oftentimes we'll find that we're going to end up learning and having a positive experience. So use that initial class time instead of the motivational technique that you were going to use for that day. Just listen to them and find out, why are you feeling this particular way? Okay, now I understand your problems. What can we do about it? Now let's move forward with our instruction today. I hope that helps. I think I saw Blanca's hand raised as well, Mark.
Yeah, let's see, Blanca, go ahead, unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the talk. It's been extremely interesting. One of the things that has been cleared up for me is the importance of of the concept of group. Because for me, it's always been sort of like instinctive. For example, my groups usually have a WhatsApp, between them, and I have nothing to do with it. And they look at me like, why not? And I said, because it's not my group, it's your problem. Well, I don't say it that way. But with what you've been saying today, it's the strength of the group that makes the strength of the learning. And it seems, I find it absolutely fascinating because I have followed Dörnyei for a while. And is there, and some of the strategies you've mentioned now and your attitudes are really, really, I mean, they fill me up because thank you. And my question more than anything is, where can I find more authors or concepts, strategies towards fortifying the concept of group? Because group in itself fortifies the teacher and the student.
Okay, there's a really good publication by Dörnyei and Murphy on group dynamics and
Okay.
second. So
Groups dynamics?
Group Dynamics, and it's a book. I don't remember the publisher.
That's all right.
But if you go to Dörnyei's site, just Google him and go to his personal website.
And Murphy, right?
And Murphy.
Yes.
Let me look quickly. I don't have that book right here, but I think I can give you the and the year it was published. Yes, 2003 from Cambridge. And
Okay.
the title is Group Dynamics in the Language Classroom.
Okay, thank you.
Then one other thing, Blanca, as soon as our university campus went to remote instruction, I started joining the student Facebook messenger groups.
Uh-huh.
And in previous session or semesters, I knew that the students had messenger groups on their own so that they could interact with each other. But as soon as we went to remote instruction, I said, I'm going to create the group for this reason. With remote learning, you're going to have lots of questions. And I know that you reach out to each other to ask, what does Dr. Anderson want us to do with this assignment? And often you feed each other incorrect information about the assignment.
Yes, yes.
So I'm going to be in the messenger group, and you can post a question to the group, and I will respond as quickly as I can to get to the question, the answer to the question. That has decreased levels of anxiety among students this semester, actually the last 4 semesters, because students can get a quick response from me, usually within minutes. So as I'm working at my machine, my computer during the day, if a message comes in, it pops up on my computer screen. And when I know that it's a question from a student, I will stop what I'm currently working on and go to the message, read it, and respond, because I feel like I want to be as accessible as possible to the students. And sometimes the students can point out problems or errors on Canvas, which is our learner management system that we're using, that I don't see from my view on Canvas. So they post the question in a screenshot, and I can go to my view of Canvas and figure out where the problem is and get it resolved before it causes anxiety for everybody. So part of me being in their group, I think, has facilitated some degree of motivation and decreasing levels of anxiety.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Dr. Anderson?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I believe Jonathan Acuna has a comment or a question.
Okay.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Dr. Anderson. I just want to make a quick comment. During your sabbatical year in Costa Rica, I remember something that you taught us and something that has been ingrained in my brain for quite a long time. And that was the importance of creating a class culture. And then, now that you're talking about this motivation cycle, definitely these two things go together, hand in hand. And I really want to thank you for this. Even though the lesson came a little bit late in time, right? But definitely it's been a wonderful asset that I'm taking away from this session of yours. Thank you.
So Jonathan, it's never too late to learn.
Of course not. It's never too late.
Even if it's been 10 years, 20
Roughly
years,
speaking, yeah, more or less.
20, it's almost, oh no, we're at about 18 years right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, from when I was in Costa Rica. Okay.
Yes, we were much younger at that time for sure. Yeah, thank you.
We all look a little older, especially when 18 years has passed. Any other questions that anyone has?
I do see Lourdes has her finger raised. I think you have to unmute yourself, Lourdes. There you go. You're still muted.
Okay.
There you go.
I feel that it has been a great speech that you gave us. And I would like to thank you because I consider that when we receive positive feedback, we get remotivated. So I would like to express my thanks and my joy after listening to all your wisdom, Dr. Neil Anderson.
Thank you, Lourdes. That is really important. I just read something on an app. I've got an app that's called the Happiness app. That may not be the exact name, but every day I get a post about ways that I can be cultivating my happiness. And one of the things that it highlighted on one of the days this week is that when we begin a meeting or a class with positive feedback to the group that we are meeting with, that positive comment will elevate everyone's positive attitude in that session that we're in. And particularly right now, with many language classes being taught via Zoom, if we can start with positive comments, even though we're not physically together in the same space, that positivity is going to radiate out to everybody that's part of the group. So Lourdes, I'm glad that you highlighted that.
I would like to add, finally, that I believe that the classroom can become, in these difficult moments, like a place for therapy. Our students can forget the problems that we are facing, no, and really engage with something that will make them greater, no? So
Yeah.
it's positive thinking.
So Lourdes, that comment is really good feedback to Lynn and her comment, because you could use the language classroom for that positive therapy session and find out, so why are you feeling so down today? Why don't you want to participate? What can we do to change the feelings that we currently have so that our learning today will be positive?
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Lourdes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm scrolling through each of the 5 screens of participants just to see if I see any more hands raised.
I think Ana Claudia is raising her hand.
Okay, now I'm back to page 1.
Go ahead, Ana Claudia. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much about the topic and about everything. I think that one of the things that we could learn from this pandemic and from COVID-19 is that we teachers are very motivated to keep doing what we do, and that we had to, as my experience, I have never done video conferences or teaching through the screen. And last year was very challenging, and motivation and keeping in touch with people who also were in the same stage as I was, and keeping everybody close, and even when you are far away in the distance, but you keep close through these instances, and giving each other motivation and encouraging people to go on. And I think that we as teachers had done a great job last year about that, motivating our students to continue, even when we weren't in the same room sharing the same air, right? So I think that what we do today is really important, and that we keep going with motivating our students and encouraging them to continue with this, even though there's even any circumstances. So thank you very much. Thank you, really.
So Ana Claudia, one of the things that I thought of as you were sharing is how important it is for us as teachers to be thinking about our motivation and the cycle of motivation, effort, results, and recalibration. We can look at that loop on the roller coaster from our perspective as a teacher, not just for our students.
Yes, totally.
And it also struck me, keep March 19th on your calendars, because that's the next PD talks where they're going to look at where is my teacher? And the topic is going to be teaching online. So I think that there are many good things that we're going to learn from, is it Richard Boyle that's the discussion leader that day?
Robert
Boyle is the discussion leader for that day. I think that there's going to be really good input that he's going to be able to provide us that will help re-energize all of us. Thank you for those comments, Ana Claudia.
Thank you.
Well, I often tell teachers that I could stay here forever. I could keep talking long into the night and all day tomorrow. But I think we've had a really good PD session together today. I just want you to know how much I really appreciate Costa Rica as a nation, and the Centro Cultural and the Universidad de Costa Rica, because of the experience that I had there in 2002 and 2003. I had been to Costa Rica multiple times before 2002. But when I was planning my first sabbatical, I knew that I wanted to be in Costa Rica. And Costa Rica has become part of what I view as my professional development home. What I learned from colleagues at the Universidad de Costa Rica and at the Centro Cultural has impacted many, many things that I do in the classroom. So thank you as a nation, as a school, as individuals for the impact that you've had on my development as a teacher and my thinking and growth as a teacher. I truly, truly have a deep and abiding love for Costa Rica and the institutions there. So thank you all.
And thank you, Dr. Neil. You just boosted, I think our egos are up there. We are highly motivated, and we could stay with you here all day, all night, just listening to you. And we're thrilled that you have, as you said, started and supported us. And you have even encouraged all of our participants to join our community of practice. And this is what we feel also at the Centro, that sharing, that learning from each other is what really builds our community together. So Dr. Neil, on behalf of the Centro, and I know we care for you deeply. We love you, as Jonathan was saying. I think it's a long, long, long marriage that we have with you here in Costa Rica. We do hope to see you soon. Thank you so much for today and for the many sessions that we really want to have with you in the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much again for joining. If you were here 2 Fridays in a row, give yourself a pat on the back. We'll see you March 19th or see you very soon in the community of practice. All right. Have a great weekend.